Well, what's up, guys? We're here at my home church where I am the production director here. I run front of house most days. Some days I'm helping out the band. But I actually just wanted to run you down my scene, my effects, my go tos on this console specifically. This is the Behringer Wing. We replaced our X32. Long live the X32. We replaced that earlier this year with the Behringer Wing. Demoed it about 3 years back and thought that it was the right choice then, but we didn't pull the trigger. Pulled the trigger this year, and I have not looked back. It's probably the best console you can get under 9K with all your routing and stuff. It's nothing like the X32, but it outperforms it in every way. So let's dive in. We're working with a song captured from a Sunday here. This one is "To the One" by Upper Room. It definitely encapsulates that modern worship sound. Lots of big drums, big O's, slams, all that kind of fun stuff. I'm going to go ahead and play a little bit of it, and then I'm going to start breaking down each channel, what processing looks like on each channel, and then work our way down to the master bus. I'm not going to be diving into any of the like setup and all that. So the way I've got things laid out is just kind of how it's going to be. There's a ton of videos out there that you can find how to do layout stuff and all of your back end setup and routing and all that. So I'm just taking audio that we recorded, passing it back through, and then using all of the onboard processing. No Waves servers, no outboard gear. This is all internal effects and processing. So I'll hit some and we'll listen. Sick. So let's start breaking this down. Well, let's start with drums. We'll just treat this like a normal sound check. This is the same scene that I load up every time. We have different instrumentalists here who bring different gear, who play differently. So you've got to think on your feet when it comes to your sound checks and get things dialed in. But you need a good starting point. So I'll kind of show you the starting point and then show you kind of where I've branched off for this song. So yeah, let's start with just the drums. We're going to go back to that chorus there. Sick. So let's break it down. Kick. We'll start there. Kick. We have just a basic gate happening, opening, closing, whenever he hits, closes after, just to eliminate cymbal bleed, all that stuff. You can kind of hear what that gate is doing. So I like having the range up a little bit. I mean, you can do whatever you like. Just do it to taste. The gate on the wing is actually pretty decent. Some gates have a super clicky sound when they open up. They actually have like a weird pop. So this one is actually pretty nice. It doesn't have that. So yeah, that range, you can have it up, you know, to hear some of it, or you can take it all the way out and it just opens and you don't hear anything else. Into EQ, we've got the SSL. This is the E channel, but it's just the EQ part of it. So doing a little bit of boosting around that 70 hertz, 80 hertz bump. Doing a dip around the 300 mark, just because where it gets super like woofy there. Kick drums can kind of get really woofy in the 300 range. Pulling out just a little bit of 900, 800-ish. It can get that like weird boxiness, and then I'm boosting the high end on that. So pretty simple EQ. And then after that, we move into the Wave Designer. This thing is really cool. This is based off the SPL Transient Designer, which if you haven't worked with transient designers before, these things are awesome. Waves makes one called Smack Attack. UAD has emulations of the SPL. It's really sick. So basically what it's doing is it's shaping the transient of the kick. And you've got two different parameters here. So you've got attack and then you have sustain. Attack is exactly kind of what it says. You can really push the top of the transient. So if you want more attack, if you want that like punch of the transient, you just boost that up a little bit. The sustain's really cool. So the sustain will work as the tail of the transient. So you can shape if you want it to die off early or if you want it to extend out and kind of be like a larger hit. Works really well on percussive stuff. So you can try it with anything else, but this is just really, it shines with percussive stuff because you can really shape a transient if you've got one single signal happening. So I'll rewind this back and we can hear kind of what this will do. I have it set to a shorter sustain. So the kick drum we have is it's a 22-inch Ludwig kick, and it has a lot of boom to it. So instead of trying to solve that with EQ, drop one of these on here and just play around with your sustain. So that's a ton of sustain. You can hear how boomy it is. To get that super tight kick sound, you drop the sustain on it. Moving on, let's go to snare. Top mic. Start out with the SSL, kind of the same thing. We're just boosting kind of that fundamental of the snare, which is around that 200, 250 mark. Then I'm taking out that like muddy, woofy boxiness of the snare, and just kind of shaping the mid-range a little bit, bring a little top end. First stage compressor on here, it's not doing too much. This is the red compressor. It's meant to model the Focusrite compressor. This one is just kind of doing light compression. It's not meant to really squash it. It's just meant to kind of extend it in a way. Same thing with the Wave Designer on the snare. This works great. I mean, if you want that like massive big snare sound, go ahead and drop this on it and do the same thing. Bottom mic. Not too much going on here, just some EQ shaping. You can see I've done some corrective EQ on just some weird frequencies here. This is just the basic wing parametric EQ. Light compression happening on it. You don't want to like over compress too much on this channel. Both of these channels, the snare channels, they get bussed into another group actually. So I have kick and snare channels going all dry, and then I have these 3 channels going into another group called the kick and snare group. This thing is cool. So if you're not familiar with parallel affecting things, so parallel just means you're running all of the same channels through another bus at the same time, generally at the same level, and you're affecting them on the separate channel. So you've got considerably like a dry mix, and then you have an affected mix, and so those are running parallel together. So I've got a parallel compressor channel happening with just the kick and snare, just to bring out a lot of punch, a lot of clarity, and it's gluing them together. So that by itself, right now I have it's called the BDX 160, but it's supposed to model the DBX 160. So you can hear what this sounds like. So you can really hear it squashing the kick and snare. With that blended into the main mix, it adds, like here in a second when we get done with all the channels, I'll let you hear just what the kick and snare group is doing to really push the kick and snare forward in a way that you can't just do on channel EQ and channel compression. Moving on. Let's move to the rack tom. We have a gate happening just to control the bleed. And then some corrective EQ. Toms, you really don't have to do too much to. As long as you have good tuned drums, they're really kind of hard to mess up. So doing some light panning on these. So floor tom so the tom's panned will be panned to the audience perspective. So if you see, the drummer is a standard right-hand drummer, usually the rack tom's going to be on the right of the audience and the floor tom's going to be on the left. So I like to pan those accordingly so you can hear. Let me go to a section with toms. So not too much is happening. You don't want to overcompress these. They have a lot of cool resonance, and you don't want to like squash that or anything. Moving on to overheads and hi-hat. We have a hi-hat mic. I hardly ever use it, to be honest, because our overheads really pick up the hi-hat. Unless there's like a specific like hi-hat part that I just want to push. Just basic EQ on that guy. Overheads are cool. Overheads, you don't want to EQ those too much. You may think of overheads as cymbal mics, but maybe you should start thinking them as full drum mics because they're picking up a full kit. Unless you're specifically close miking cymbals, which is a cool thing to do too. Overheads you generally have a stereo pair, and you want them to get a full perspective of the drums. So I have low cut just about all of the low end out of it. So all the way up until 215 is cut out. That's just because we have close mics on some of the low end drums, and having that cut through, you don't want your overheads just woofing the whole time. So cutting all that out, cleaning it up, standard low cut. Not too much EQ. They sounded pretty good. Compression. Compress your overheads really tastefully. You don't want these just like slamming the whole time, getting compressed. One thing that's really cool, actually, so you may see a compressor on here, but they're not really getting compressed in the way you think. What's happening with this compressor on the overheads is they're receiving sidechain compression. So if you don't know about sidechain, we talked about parallel compression. Now let's talk about sidechain compression. Sidechain compression adds compression to a certain channel, but it receives the input for the parameters from a different source. So what that means is the overhead channel has a compressor on it ready to react whenever we say, but what chooses to react, what the compressor sees and chooses to react is what you set. So up here you have a key source, and you can choose another input, you can choose another source to say, hey, whenever this when this source is getting signal, let's take that and add that into the parameters of what's being compressed on another channel. So it's super confusing, but I'll show you how it works. So basically, the overhead channel has a compressor on it. I've set what I want to happen on that compressor, but I don't want it to see what's happening on the overhead channel. What I want is for it to see what's happening on the snare channel. Now you might ask why. So I really like the sound of my snare coming through my snare mics. I don't really love the sound of the snare coming through the overheads. At least that's not what I want to hear primarily. I like the way that the overheads make the snare sound, but I don't want that to be influencing the way the snare sounds tremendously. So you can compress your overheads specific to what's happening with your snare with sidechain compression. So back to the compressor, I've set my settings and I can choose the source that I want. So I've chosen the snare top channel. So now every time the snare hits, it will cause the compressor on the overheads to dip at whatever parameter I set. So let's listen to the overheads and I will just crank it and you can kind of hear what's happening when the snare hits. Right now you can see the compressor is compressing every time the snare hits. So this is just completely dry, no compression, just fully open. And now every time that snare hits, as I pull this threshold down, you can start to hear that the overheads are just dipping out just a little bit. And what's happening is that's letting the snare come through clearer. I'm going to unsolo this and you can hear the whole drums. So you hear all those crashes, you hear the overheads, the cymbals, and the drums sound good. Every time that snare hits, you're hearing the cymbals just dip just a little bit. Just letting room for that snare to cut through. All right, that was a long time on overheads, I'm sorry. It really makes a difference. If you want the difference between like, oh, wow, that snare sounds cool, or, oh my gosh, that snare, it sounds great. This is one of those things. Moving on to buses. All of these drums, they get grouped, and then they also get sent to another bus. So we talked about the kick and snare group. Let's talk about this other parallel compressor. What's happening in this one, this is my drum smash group. So what's happening is all of the drums are getting bussed in, and then they're getting over compressed. Right here, I'm using the Behringer's no stressor, which is a emulation of the de-stressor. Empirical Labs de-stressor. So this thing is awesome. It's like a modern 76, really, really cool sound. When you set it to its nuke setting, it crushes the living life out of anything you put in it. So let's listen to just the bus and what it's doing with just this compressor. I'm going to crank it. So it's just smashing it. I mean, that's why it's called the drum smash group. It's just absolutely obliterating it. What that's doing, you want to blend that in. Like I said, you've got your main channel and then you've got your blended channel. So you're going to use that wisely. You're not going to use that as your main signal. You're going to use that to really bring more life out of the drums. So let's listen to the drums without that group specifically. Sounds pretty good, but watch this. It just brings in, number one, it glues it all together because it's grouping them and then compressing them. So it's naturally going to solidify them into just one cohesive unit. But also what it's doing is just bringing out more life of it. It's bringing out more intelligibility of what you're hearing. Makes it just cooler sounding. I mean, that's kind of what it's doing. It adds a ton of character to that rock genre we all know. It's just super over compressed, but with a taste to it, because as you blend it in, I might not always run it, full swing. I might, back it off to make it a little more dynamic. Really cool technique. I encourage you to do if you have extra space for buses to work. One thing I will say about working with buses on here is, if you're used to using Wave Sound Grid or any kind of outboard processing units, you're having to worry about time alignment, especially with like latency and DSP loads. What's cool about the Wing is a lot of these plugins are built straight onto the channel itself. So it's not really going to uh, another place and having to come back and have all this time routing happening. And so you're not really having to get into delay compensation or making sure that things are back in phase. It's like it's all calculated for you because the plugins are built into the channel itself. That being said, I am using an outboard, or not outboard, but I am using an effect rack on this drum smash group as well. I'm using a tape saturation plugin. It's called Tape Machine, but what it's doing is adding some saturation, some kind of warp. It's supposed to mimic the sound getting processed through a tape machine. So let's listen to what that's doing specifically. This is bypass. It's just clean, compressed audio. So what it's doing is it's adding harmonics, it's adding saturation. Let me crank this up so you can see. Just crunched out right there whenever I brought that up. That's a little too much for my taste. That feels good. You can really hear that with the resonance of the snare. It just kind of crunches in a nice way. Sweet. That's all the dynamic drum processing we're doing. Let me just go over my reverb channel for the drums. This is the TC Electronic reverb built in. This is another effects rack. So all of let's see what's coming through here. So I've got snare, a little bit of the bottom, and then a little bit of the toms kind of working in there as well, just to kind of add a little more space to the drums. We can hear what that sounds like. Kind of EQing out all the low end on it. Just big tail, really, really wide. Sounds awesome. Sweet. We've knocked out drums. Let's move on to bass. So the bass, it's running through a DI preamp called the Aguilar Tone Hammer, which has a great overdrive section on it. It's all direct, so no bass amps or anything like that. The bass player is using a pick though, so that adds a lot of energy, adds a lot of top end and grit to the tone. So you kind of heard it was kind of overdriving. Not super outrageous, but it definitely works because it's a bass guitar. It really works great blended in with electric guitars. Having really kind of like muffled bass, like rolled off high end bass tone, it yeah it can sound good in the low end side, but you lose a ton of energy on that top end. especially when you're like driving, if you're finger picking and stuff on a big part, you're losing that energy from driving notes. You want some kind of top end transient. You want to be able to hear some kind of crisp to it. So using a pick, number one, will solve that. It's a great way of have, especially for this type of genre of music. Like I think it's what makes it. It's part of the backbone. Is like picked bass. So I'm not EQing too much out of this. I'm pulling out some of that. Man, that 400 500 is just it's really hard to work with. So it's usually some of the parts that I'm dipping out, compressing it just a little bit with this LA2A. Let's hear it again. It's already compressed with the overdrive out of the pedal, but adding just a little bit more will help keep everything streamlined and leveled correctly. Don't want to over squash it. So you can hear an octave pedal, which just added on here. So that just brings in that super deep low end. Let's go ahead and jump over to our guitars. We have three. We have two electrics, one acoustic. Both of these electric guitars are full stereo, so you have a left and a right for each of them. But you want to be careful on your panning, just because there's 4 signals now, and you'll be getting tons and tons of phase if you're not careful. So I pan them about 40% on each side. So one guitar is on my left here. Let's start with that one. Not doing too much EQ here. Kind of bringing out this like 300 here. Bringing out some of that 700 here. Each guitar is going to be different, so you just need to use your ear on where you're EQing there. We have a Fair Kid compressor happening here, the Fairchild. Let's move on to the other one. This one's just the big driving rhythm guitar. Kind of similar EQ happening. This was a single coil guitar, so it's a lot brighter. You can see this dip. I dipped on the high end here. Same deal on the compressor. You don't want to over compress these. Most of the electric guitarists have a compressor on their board, and that mixed in with all of the overdrive and stuff, it's already super compressed. So these compressors aren't, meant to actually bring more signal out. It's meant to just kind of tame it if there's any crazy. All right, let's listen. Let's listen to them with the bass. So the bass, like I said, it really supports the guitars better. They all kind of feel as one unit, just because of the tone of the picked bass. Let's take a real quick look at acoustic. It's not good. We're just gonna make the best of it. This was just a regular acoustic guitar plugged in. LA2A, some corrective EQ, and then just a reverb dropped right on it, just to kind of give it space. So we're getting somewhere now. Let's move on to keys. So we've got keys. Keys are broken up into 2 channels. We have a piano channel. And have a synth channel. So if you've got, you know, pretty standard keys rig is, someone running their computer next to a MIDI controller, and they've got all their sounds programmed into their computer. You shouldn't have to do hardly any processing on that. Maybe just cutting out some low end. You can see this piano. Just put a regular high pass filter on it and called it a day. There's like a weird frequency happening here in the mid range, but other than that, I haven't really touched them, and they sound good right out of the computer. So let's listen to them in the mix with everything. Yeah. Yeah, so that's the band right there. There wasn't any more instruments. There was this drum pad. Let's talk about the drum pad real quick. Drum pad's kind of similar. The sounds should be good right out of the box. That tambourine sample was super loud for some reason, and I kind of knew that going into it. So knowing the groove, bring it down so it just doesn't overwhelm. I didn't have to do too much to this. Dropped the lows again, so just you're not getting that information all the way down there that you can't even hear. And then just a little mid-range. Our room sounds a little funky in this like 500 to 700 range, so most of these channels have that. Yeah, that should be it. So let's talk about vocals. Vocals are definitely the hardest thing to work with. You just are using live mics on a loud stage. There's drums. If you use wedges, that's another thing. They're always going to be a challenge, and you just kind of have to work with what you have most of the time. There are things that you can do to fix it, whether that's changing your mic capsule if you're using a dynamic or a condenser mic, your placement on the stage. Do you have a drum shield or shy baffles or whatever you can do to eliminate drum bleed? All of that will go into how your microphones sound from your vocalists. Let's jump into it. This was female-led. So we have our lead vocalist here. What's awesome about this console is that your channel strip. Most consoles don't have the ability to rearrange your pre-fader dynamics in a arrangement that you like. It's usually gate, EQ, compression, limiting whatever you have there, and then it gets sent off to your fader. And so this console is really cool because you can actually arrange different effects in different orders, which is really, really cool. So I have kind of spent a lot of time figuring out what the best way the channel strip should look on vocals here. So let's break it down. There's a lot of cool stuff happening. We have, let's listen to it real quick, actually. So some low end taken out. This vocalist has a really awesome mic technique. So we were using a SEV7 mic for this. So it's a dynamic mic. It's like a modern SM58. So it has that proximity effect really heavily. And since she has really good mic technique, she holds it, so close. So you're getting a lot of low end. Let me just take all that out and you can hear exactly.
Magnify your life.
So all the low end is there. I just want to eliminate that hum, that low, rumbling. Taking out some of the weird low mids.
Jesus Christ, we
so now we're hitting our first stage of compression. This is the LA2A. It's just doing the first stage, kind of catching all of it. You don't want to over compress here. I wouldn't recommend compressing more than 7 dB on any of your compressors for vocals. Doing them with multiple compressors and stages helps you achieve a better product without over compressing on one compressor and it just squashing it. So we're going to use a couple here. So we've got one capturing all of the front end. Then we have a 1176 black side. This is adding color. It's adding grit. It has harmonic value to it. So it's bringing out some of the kind of crispy saturation. So this is after the LA2A. Now on to my favorite part about this console is they have built-in auto-tune. It actually works really, really well. One thing to note about auto-tune is it will not make a bad vocalist sound good. It will make a good vocalist sound great. So it's not going to fix everything. What it's going to do is just push that vocal to perfection, basically. And what's awesome is it sounds pretty musical. It sounds really human. That's one of the hardest things for auto-tunes to work out, is just the way that they sound. So let me bypass, and you can hear kind of what's happening before and after.
Your life, for your majesty, we crown you King of Kings. Oh, Jesus Christ, we
so you can kind of get that T-Pain effect if you crank it up. I don't recommend doing this.
For your majesty,
back off the speed a little bit.
We crown you King of Kings. Every voice, every voice.
Really cool. Let's talk about vocal reverb. This is going to, it looks like a lexicon style reverb. They all just kind of get bussed in and affected. Let's listen.
Magnify your life. For your majesty, we crown you King of Kings.
You can hear some of the BGVs are still piped in there because it's using one bus and it's all being sent pre-fader. So you set your levels and then they get affected. So that's why when I soloed it, you heard some of the other BGVs. But so let's move on to delay. This is really awesome. We're here and they finally put just such amazing emulations in this console, all built in. This is modeled after the Waves H delay. It's a stereo delay and you can actually set different time parameters for each side. Right now I have it set to, it's a whole note on one side and then it's a dotted eighth note on the other side. Really sick. It's awesome because it just creates such a wide stereo image for your effects. Um, and having the two different parameters, it really opens up your vocals to sound bigger than they are. Let's listen to some of the BGVs. One who overcame, we lift you higher, we lift you higher to the name above all names.
There is no other, there is no other to the one who overcame. We lift you higher, we lift you higher to the name above all names. There is no one who overcame. Above all names, there is no other, there is no other to the one who overcame. We lift you higher, we lift you higher to the name above all names.
One other vocal effect I'm using is a parallel vocal compressor. We have the no stressor back on. This is just to glue all the vocals together, especially those BGVs. You're going to need to kind of make the vocals feel like a cohesive unit again. What happens with the drums kind of happens with multiple singers too. So go ahead and bus all those together and add a compressor on it. It's not doing too much, but it is running parallel to the vocal group.
One who overcame. We lift you higher, we lift you higher to the name above all names. There is no other, there is no other
So on,
to the one who
off.
overcame. We lift you higher, we lift
And that's
you
all blended in.
higher to the name above all names. There is no other, there is no other like you, God. There's no one else but you. There's no one else like you.
Sweet. So we've made it to the end of the mix. Let's talk about master bus processing. There's not too much happening here. So it's hitting a G bus compressor from SSL. It's not compressing a ton. You don't want to over compress your mains, especially in a live environment. You want things to feel super dynamic. When the band comes down, you want that room noise to come back up and kind of like hear everything naturally again. But as the music builds up, you want that to overtake the room, and you're not even really able to hear what you're saying because it's at a certain level. What's really cool is this is kind of a great bus compressor, and dropping it on anything that has a full mix will kind of just bring it more to life, and glue it together. Going into this is like a multi-band compressor. It's called the C5 Combinator. It's pretty much like a C6 or a C4 from Waves, if you've used that, or any type of multi-band compression. You can adjust each band of your frequency spectrum to compress at a different parameter, and it's just kind of it's taming everything. It's taming the top end, it's taming the low end, but also I've boosted it so it's like a more consistent low end. Let's listen to either of these. They're really subtle.
One who overcame. We lift you higher, we lift you higher to the name above all names. There is no other, there is no other to the one who overcame. We lift you higher, we lift you higher.
So you can hear the different bands if you solo them out.
There
Yep.
There's no one else but you.
So I'm just going to go back through with everything you've been able to see and hear, and we're just going to remix this song and get it sounding as best as we can.
It's the mystery of this hope in me. How
hope you learned something. I hope you were inspired. This wing has just definitely been everything that we were looking for. We had thrown around thoughts of going to the Wave sound grid setup. We thought about going with any other manufacturer, but just for the budget and for what we needed at the time, this was just perfect. I encourage you, go look stuff up about this console if you don't already know, and just the flexibility and the power that this thing has behind it has just blown us away, and we definitely love it here at our church. So once again, I just hope that something was helpful to you in this video, and we will see you in the next one.